Just 1 minute ago, the walls of Windsor Castle, known for centuries of silence and secrecy, echoed with a revelation no one was prepared to hear. A statement, brief yet devastating, confirmed whispers that had been circulating behind palace doors for months. Princess Anne, the monarchy's most steadfast figure, is facing something deeply personal and profoundly tragic. But what exactly is being hidden behind those carefully chosen words? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The announcement itself was striking not because of its length, but because of its tone. For an institution built on restraint, this message felt unusually human, almost fragile. There was no grand flourish, no stiff detachment. Instead, there was a quiet admission that something was changing, something irreversible. And within seconds, the world sensed it. The palace has issued statements before illnesses, hospital visits, temporary withdrawals from duty. But this felt different. The language carried a weight that royal watchers immediately recognized. Protocol, that invisible shield that has guarded the monarchy for generations, seemed to falter. Words were chosen carefully, yet they trembled with emotion. There was mention of memory loss, a phrase that hovered ominously between medical clarity and deliberate vagueness. Not a diagnosis, not a reassurance, just enough to ignite concern without confirming fear. In royal tradition, transparency is measured in droplets, not waves. Yet this disclosure felt like a crack in the dam. Public reaction was instantaneous and visceral. Shock rippled through social media. Commentators stumbled over their own speculation. Loyal supporters expressed disbelief. How could Princess Anne, the tireless royal who never complained, never faltered, be facing something so profoundly personal? For decades, she has embodied discipline, duty before discomfort, silence before self. She rode through scandal untouched, worked through injury without spectacle, and upheld her role with a steel spine that seemed unbreakable. That is precisely why this revelation unsettles so deeply. Strength, when constant, becomes expected, and when it wavers, even slightly, it shakes the entire foundation. The phrase memory loss lingers like a shadow. It suggests more than it says. It opens doors to possibilities the palace refuses to name. Is this temporary? Is it progressive? Is it manageable? Or is it the beginning of a chapter no one is ready to write? The monarchy survives uncertainty, on the illusion that its pillars do not erode. Yet here is one of its strongest pillars, quietly acknowledging vulnerability. The restraint of the statement feels intentional, as though the public is being guided gently toward a reality that will unfold in stages. And that realization raises another unsettling question. Has the palace been preparing us for this moment all along? In recent months, there were subtle signs, fewer appearances, adjusted schedules, carefully phrased updates about rest and recovery. Nothing alarming on its own. But together, they form a pattern that now feels impossible to ignore. It is as if the groundwork was being laid, brick by cautious brick, for an announcement that could never truly be softened. The monarchy understands timing better than anyone. It releases truths when resistance is lowest and sympathy is highest. And yet, even with preparation, this news lands like a thunderclap. Then came the silence. No follow-up clarification, no reassuring medical bulletin, just a stillness that feels heavier than the statement itself. In that quiet, speculation grows louder. The absence of detail becomes its own message. The world waits, uneasy, aware that something significant has shifted within the royal household. And as the weight of this revelation settles, one truth becomes unavoidable. This is not just about a health update. It is about legacy, resilience, and the fragility hidden beneath decades of unwavering composure. But to understand why this news feels so deeply unsettling, we have to go back far beyond today to the woman Princess Anne has always been. Before the whispers, before the announcement, there was a woman known as the monarchy's iron spine. Princess Anne wasn't just another royal, she was the embodiment of discipline, duty, and quiet resilience. A figure who never faltered in public, never sought sympathy, and never broke under pressure. So how does someone so unshakable become the center of a story defined by loss and something far more fragile? For decades, she stood as the monarchy's most reliable constant, the royal who showed up when others stepped back, who carried engagements on her calendar like badges of honor rather than burdens to endure. She earned the reputation as the hardest-working member of the family, not through spectacle, but through stamina. Year after year, her schedule outpaced heirs and headlines alike. While others drew global fascination, she drew something quieter respect: tireless visits, endless patronages, early mornings, and late returns. She approached royal duty not as privilege, but as obligation carved in stone. Comfort was irrelevant. Personal preference rarely entered the equation. If the crown required presence, she delivered it without hesitation, without theatrics, without complaint. That consistency built her legend. It also built a wall. Public perception cast her as formidable, efficient, almost austere. Admired, yes, but often underestimated. She did not court popularity, she did not reshape herself to fit modern narratives. Instead, she remained immovable, anchored in tradition, while storms of scandal and reinvention swirled around her. In an age where vulnerability became currency, she offered none. Interviews were measured, emotions were contained. Even under intense scrutiny, she maintained a composure so precise it felt architectural, as though each word and gesture had been fortified long before it reached the public ear. But composure can be deceptive. The ability to remain steady under pressure often conceals the cost of that steadiness. For Princess Anne, emotional distance became both armor and identity. She mastered the art of restraint so completely that it blurred the line between protection and isolation. There were no dramatic confessions, no visible fractures, just the quiet persistence of someone who believed that feeling deeply and showing it were two very different things. And perhaps that is why this moment feels so jarring. Because if strength is all we have ever seen, vulnerability feels almost impossible to reconcile. Her identity was not built on charisma or controversy. It was built on memory, on routine, on discipline so ingrained it seemed instinctive. Every engagement remembered, every protocol internalized, every detail stored and retrieved with precision. She carried decades of service in her mind like a living archive of the monarchy itself. That mental sharpness became part of her mystique. It reinforced the belief that she was unbreakable, not just physically resilient, but cognitively unwavering. To imagine that foundation shifting is to imagine the very rhythm of her life disrupted. And that is where the weight of this diagnosis lands with such force. It does not simply challenge her health. It challenges everything she represents. If memory falters, what happens to the woman whose existence has been defined by recall, reliability, and ritual? If routine slips, what becomes of the royal who structured her world around it? The revelation is not just medical, it is symbolic. It confronts the mythology of permanence that has surrounded her for decades. It forces the public to reconsider the image they thought was indestructible, because the iron spine was never just about strength. It was about continuity, stability, the assurance that some figures within the monarchy would remain unchanged, no matter how turbulent the era. Now, that assurance feels uncertain. And as admiration turns into quiet concern, a deeper realization begins to surface. Even the most disciplined lives are not immune to fragility. Even the most controlled narratives can shift without warning. And yet, behind that unwavering exterior, subtle cracks had already begun to form long before anyone dared to name them. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment of collapse. Instead, it began with something almost invisible: small slips, fleeting pauses, moments dismissed as fatigue. But those who were watching closely began to notice a pattern. A hesitation here, a forgotten detail there. Were these harmless signs of aging, or the beginning of something the palace was desperate to keep hidden? At first, the changes were so subtle, they felt almost imagined, quickly explained away by a demanding schedule or the natural toll of decades in public service. During engagements that once unfolded with clockwork precision, there were instances of brief confusion and introduction repeated, a familiar name momentarily misplaced. Nothing dramatic, nothing headline-worthy. Yet for a woman known for razor-sharp recall, even the smallest deviation felt startling. Observers noted a flicker of uncertainty where there had always been certainty, a pause that lingered a second too long. The kind of detail most would overlook, except this was Princess Anne, the royal who prided herself on never missing a beat. Behind closed doors, whispers began to circulate. Staff members, fiercely loyal and carefully trained, exchanged concerned glances rather than public comments. There were reports of repeated conversations, instructions given twice, diary commitments that required quiet clarification. No one dared label it, no one wanted to. To question her sharpness felt almost disloyal, as though acknowledging vulnerability would fracture the image she had spent a lifetime constructing. And so, adjustments were made discreetly. Schedules were refined. Briefings became more detailed. Trusted aides remained closer than usual, their vigilance masked as efficiency. The royal family, bound by tradition and united by instinct for preservation, maintained a seamless exterior. Appearances continued. Smiles remained steady. Official updates spoke of routine commitments and ongoing dedication. If there was concern, it was carefully contained within palace walls. Normalcy became a strategy. The less the public sensed, the less they would question. Yet tension has a way of seeping through even the most disciplined performances. Subtle changes in cadence, engagements shortened, a growing reliance on prepared notes where once memory had sufficed. Meanwhile, the media began to circle. Not aggressively, at least not at first, but with curiosity sharpened by repetition. Commentators pointed to minor inconsistencies, only to retreat without confirmation. There was speculation but no proof, and in the absence of official acknowledgement, uncertainty grew louder. The palace understood the danger of rumor. Too much silence breeds suspicion. Too much transparency invites scrutiny. It was a delicate balance, and the stakes were rising. What made the situation even more complex was her reputation itself. For decades, Princess Anne's composure had been her shield. If she appeared steady, the world believed she was steady. That long-cultivated image worked in her favor now, concealing what might otherwise have triggered alarm. Admirers assumed resilience. Critics assumed fatigue. Few dared consider something more serious. But inside the institution, perception and reality were beginning to drift apart. As months passed, the pattern became harder to dismiss. The pauses were no longer isolated, the clarifications more fresh. Indeed, the careful choreography more noticeable to those who paid attention. It was not chaos. It was not dramatic unraveling. It was quieter than that, and perhaps more unsettling because of it. The monarchy thrives on continuity, on the promise that its central figures remain unwavering. Any suggestion of fragility threatens that promise. And so the question slowly shifted. No longer was it about whether these signs were meaningful. It became about timing, about awareness, about how long the inner circle had been managing a reality the public was only beginning to suspect. Because once the illusion of invincibility begins to crack, it cannot easily be restored. As the signs became harder to ignore, the question was no longer if something was wrong, but how long the palace had known. Inside Windsor Castle, far from cameras and public ceremonies, a very different story was unfolding. What the world saw was control, but behind closed doors, there were whispers of concern, urgent consultations, and decisions that would reshape the royal inner circle. How do you confront a crisis that threatens not just a person, but the very image of strength the monarchy depends on? In private rooms, where protocol usually governs every breath, conversations grew heavier, more urgent, and far more personal than anyone was prepared for. Medical consultations were arranged quietly, without the usual layers of ceremonial detachment. Specialists arrived discreetly. Assessments were conducted with careful optimism, but the tone behind closed doors carried something harder to ignore: uncertainty. Advisors who had long dealt with political storms and public scandals now found themselves navigating something far more intimate. This was not a headline to be managed. This was a human reality, unfolding slowly, stubbornly, beyond the reach of strategy. Each appointment brought answers, but not the kind anyone wanted. Words like monitoring, progression, and management began to surface, wrapped in clinical calm yet loaded with implication. For close family members, the shift was deeply personal. They were not observing from a distance. They were witnessing it in real time. Small confusions during private conversations, stories repeated within hours, moments where recognition flickered instead of flowed. It is one thing to read a report. It is another to feel the change in someone you have known your entire life. Behind composed expressions, there was heartbreak. Behind measured statements, there was fear. They understood what the public did not. that resilience has limits, and even the strongest among them was confronting something she could not command into submission. Then came the dilemma that haunted every discussion: protect her dignity or prepare the nation. Princess Anne had built her identity on competence and self-reliance. To publicly acknowledge vulnerability risked undermining decades of carefully cultivated strength, yet silence carried its own danger. If the truth emerged without context, it could spiral beyond control. The monarchy has always valued stability above all else. Now stability required honesty, but honesty carried consequences. Each option felt like a betrayal of something sacred. In response, isolation increased. Engagements were adjusted under the guise of efficiency. Appearances were limited to settings that offered familiarity and predictability. The goal was not concealment for deception's sake, but protection from intrusive speculation, from harsh interpretation, from the cruelty of public judgment. Trusted aides became more than staff. They became guardians of routine. They refined daily schedules, simplified briefings, anticipated potential confusion before it surfaced. Their loyalty was unwavering, but the weight of responsibility, it was immense. They were not just managing a calendar. They were preserving a legacy. Yet even within those walls, agreement was not universal. Some believed transparency would strengthen public trust. Others argued that revealing too much too soon would invite chaos. Tension simmered in private meetings. Voices remained respectful, but the stakes were clear. This was not merely about one royal's health. It was about the institution's future perception, and beneath every strategic debate lay a quieter, more painful acknowledgement. This might not be temporary. The possibility of irreversibility crept into conversations with a gravity that no one could dismiss. The first time that reality was spoken aloud, it shifted everything. Hope did not vanish, but it became cautious, fragile. Plans were drafted not just for recovery, but for adaptation. Roles reconsidered, responsibilities redistributed. The monarchy, so accustomed to projecting permanence, was forced to confront fragility at its core. And while the palace worked tirelessly to contain uncertainty within its historic walls, an undeniable truth was forming. Because no matter how carefully managed the narrative became, change leaves traces, and those traces were beginning to show. But even as the palace tried to contain the situation, the outside world was beginning to sense that something wasn't right. It started as whispers, but whispers have a way of becoming headlines. Suddenly, speculation exploded across media outlets, each one trying to piece together a story the palace refused to confirm. Was this just rumor, or was the truth slipping through the cracks? And more importantly, why was the monarchy staying silent while the world demanded answers? The shift was swift and unforgiving. What had once been cautious curiosity transformed into a storm of bold claims and urgent analysis. Tabloids seized on every altered schedule, every shortened appearance, every carefully worded update. Anonymous sources emerged, each offering fragments that felt convincing yet incomplete. Some suggested exhaustion, others hinted at something far more serious. Contradictory reports collided, leaving the public suspended between reassurance and alarm. One headline promised stability, another warned of decline. The result was chaos, not of confirmed fact, but of interpretation. And in that confusion, tension tightened like a wire pulled too far. The frustration was palpable. Supporters who had long admired Princess Anne's unwavering service felt shut out. Critics accused the palace of calculated concealment. Questions echoed across platforms. Why the secrecy? Why the vague phrasing? Why not speak plainly? The monarchy, an institution that survives on controlled narrative, suddenly faced a narrative spiraling beyond its grasp. Silence, once a symbol of dignity, began to look like evasion, and in a world accustomed to instant transparency, patience wore thin. Online discourse turned emotional, even combative. Some defended the family's right to privacy, arguing that health is deeply personal and not a public spectacle. Others insisted that a senior royal's condition carries national consequence. The divide deepened by the hour. Empathy clashed with entitlement. Loyalty clashed with suspicion. And at the center of it all was a woman who had spent her life avoiding drama, now unwillingly cast as the focal point of a public reckoning. The monarchy's silence was not accidental, it was strategic. Every word withheld was weighed against long-term stability, Advisors understood that premature confirmation could trigger panic, while denial could shatter credibility if later disproven. So they waited, they observed. They allowed the speculation to burn itself out, or so they hoped. But the longer the quiet stretched, the louder the assumptions became. Silence, in this context, was not empty. It was interpreted. It was analyzed. It was mistrusted. The gap between official statements and public belief widened with each passing day. Carefully crafted updates spoke of continued commitment and routine adjustments. Yet the public, now hyper-aware of subtle inconsistencies, read between every line. The absence of direct answers became its own message. Confidence wavered. Even loyal observers began to wonder if they were being shielded or misled. And that doubt, once planted, proved difficult to uproot. Pressure mounted relentlessly on Windsor Castle. Journalists demanded clarification. Commentators predicted imminent disclosures. Behind palace walls, the atmosphere shifted from controlled concern to urgent calculation. The strategy of restraint was reaching its limit. Every institution faces moments when maintaining composure risks appearing detached. This was one of them. The monarchy could no longer rely solely on tradition to quiet a modern audience hungry for truth. And as speculation crescendoed into a roar that could no longer be dismissed as background noise, the choice became unavoidable. Continue the silence and risk losing public trust, or confront the storm head-on. The tension reached a breaking point, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a collective realization that the narrative was slipping beyond control. And then, when the pressure became impossible to ignore, the palace finally broke its silence. When the statement finally came, it didn't just confirm the rumors, it shattered something deeper. Carefully worded yet unmistakably clear, Windsor Castle acknowledged what many feared but hoped wasn't true. Princess Anne is facing memory loss. But what does that truly mean? And why does the simplicity of those words feel so profoundly heartbreaking? The announcement was brief, almost restrained to the point of austerity, yet every sentence carried the weight of inevitability. There were no dramatic flourishes, no medical specifics laid bare for scrutiny. Just a calm admission that changes had been observed and were being addressed with care. The phrase, memory loss, landed with a quiet devastation. It is a term that sounds clinical, almost gentle, but beneath it lies something far more unsettling. Memory is not just recall. It is identity. It is continuity. For a woman whose life has been structured around discipline and precision, whose days have unfolded with unwavering order, the idea of memory slipping away feels like the unraveling of something sacred. The palace did not elaborate on severity. It did not define progression. It offered reassurance of support and stability. And yet, what was left unsaid echoed louder than any confirmation. What the statement avoided was as telling as what it contained. There was no timeline, no prognosis, no clear description of how this would affect her duties moving forward. The absence of detail created a silence filled instantly by interpretation. Royal watchers parsed every word, analyzing tone and phrasing as if decoding a cipher. Was this an early-stage acknowledgement, a preemptive disclosure before visible decline, or a measured way of preparing the public for gradual withdrawal? The ambiguity was intentional, but it did little to soften the blow. Public reaction shifted from speculation to stunned acceptance. Sympathy poured in, not just from loyal supporters, but from voices that had once criticized her stoicism. The narrative changed overnight. No longer was she the unyielding iron spine. She was a human being confronting vulnerability in the most public way imaginable. Commentators spoke with reverence. Critics quieted. The conversation turned solemn. Because memory loss does not simply challenge health. It challenges legacy. It forces a nation to confront the fragility of those it has long viewed as permanent. Symbolically, the moment felt seismic. The monarchy has always projected continuity, an unbroken thread connecting past to present. And now, one of its most steadfast figures was facing the erosion of the very faculty that binds past to present. The announcement did not scream crisis, but it whispered transformation. It marked a turning point, subtle yet profound. The institution that thrives on ritual and remembrance was acknowledging that even its most disciplined guardian could not control the passage of time. Behind the formal language was a deeply human reality, a family grappling with change, advisors recalibrating expectations, a woman confronting something that cannot be solved through endurance alone. For decades, Princess Anne carried the monarchy's history in her mind, recalling details others forgot, honoring traditions others overlooked. Now, the weight of that history feels heavier, more fragile. The shift from rumor to undeniable truth is complete. The uncertainty is no longer hypothetical, it is official. And as the reality settles into public consciousness, grief begins to mingle with respect. Not grief for a life ended, but for a chapter closing quietly without spectacle. The strength remains, but it is now intertwined with vulnerability. The certainty has been replaced with questions that linger in the silence after the statement. But as the reality began to sink in, a deeper question emerged. What happens next for someone whose life has always been defined by memory? For the public, it was heartbreaking. But for those closest to Princess Anne, it was something far more personal. Behind the grandeur of royal life lies a family one now facing the painful reality of watching a loved one slowly lose pieces of herself. How do you say goodbye to someone who is still here? And how does a family built on duty process something so deeply human? These are not questions answered in press releases or polished statements. They are whispered in private rooms, carried in heavy silences, and felt in the space between what was and what is becoming. For her immediate family, the announcement did not mark the beginning of the struggle, it confirmed what they had already been living. They had seen the subtle changes before the world ever suspected them. They had felt the pause in conversation, the flicker of uncertainty in familiar routines. And while the public processed shock, they were processing grief. Not the sudden grief of loss, but the slow, aching kind that stretches over time. The kind that asks you to stay strong while your heart quietly fractures. Behind their public composure lies a different reality. They stand beside her at official events, measured and steady, aware that every expression will be scrutinized. But in private, there are moments of raw vulnerability. There are instances when recognition lights up her face, sharp and unmistakable, and hope surges through the room. And then there are moments when confusion replaces clarity, when a name or memory slips beyond reach. Those are the moments that linger long after the conversation ends. Those are the moments that make the future feel uncertain. Relationships inevitably begin to shift. Roles subtly rearrange themselves. Children become protectors. Siblings become guardians of routine. Decisions once made independently now require quiet collaboration. It is a delicate transformation, handled with love, but weighted with sorrow. For a family so accustomed to hierarchy and tradition, this emotional recalibration is profound. They are not just adjusting schedules. They are adjusting to a new version of someone they have known their entire lives. Balancing public duty with personal pain becomes its own silent battle. The monarchy does not pause for private hardship. Engagements continue. Ceremonies proceed. Smiles are offered where expected. Yet beneath that unwavering exterior lies exhaustion, the emotional toll of compartmentalizing grief. They must honor their responsibilities to the nation while safeguarding her dignity, protecting her from unnecessary scrutiny, and shielding their own vulnerability from view. It is an impossible balance, but one they attempt with quiet determination. There is also fear, the unspoken kind, the kind that settles in during the stillness of night. How far will this go? How much will change? How much will remain? Memory loss is not a single event. It is a journey without a clear map. Each day carries the possibility of clarity or confusion. Each conversation holds the hope of connection or the sting of absence. And that uncertainty can feel relentless. Perhaps the most painful paradox is this: she is still here, still present, still capable of laughter, of strength, of moments that feel entirely unchanged. Yet there is an awareness that something is shifting beneath the surface, a gradual erosion that cannot be reversed through willpower alone. To love someone in this state is to hold joy and sorrow simultaneously, to celebrate what remains while mourning what may fade. For a family defined by resilience, this chapter demands a different kind of courage, not the courage of public duty, but the courage of tenderness. And yet, beyond the family, this moment raises a question that reaches far beyond Windsor Castle itself. This isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a turning point. Princess Anne has long been one of the monarchy's most reliable pillars. So what happens when that pillar begins to falter? Is this simply a moment of sadness, or the beginning of a deeper transformation within the royal institution itself? For decades, she has been the steady rhythm beneath the crown ceremony, the figure who carried responsibility without fanfare and upheld continuity without demanding applause. Her presence has not been ornamental, it has been structural. Within palace walls, our role has often extended beyond public engagements. She has been a stabilizing force in times of internal strain, a disciplined voice when emotion threatened to overshadow judgment. When controversies rattled the family, she remained focused. When public opinion shifted, she did not bend with it. That constancy created a sense of assurance that someone, at least, would remain unshaken. Now, with her involvement potentially reduced, that assurance feels less certain. The immediate impact is practical as much as symbolic. Responsibilities once managed with quiet efficiency must be redistributed. Patronages that relied on her personal oversight require new advocates. Events long associated with her presence will unfold differently. This is not merely a matter of filling dates on a calendar. It is about transferring trust. Because when a royal steps back, the vacuum is not just logistical, it is emotional. The public associates faces with causes, and her face has represented dedication for generations. Questions of succession of responsibility are already surfacing. Not succession to the throne, but succession of influence. Who absorbs her workload? Who inherits the credibility she built through decades of consistency? Younger members may step forward, but stepping forward is not the same as embodying legacy. The transition will be watched closely, analyzed not only for efficiency, but for authenticity. Can anyone replicate the quiet authority she commanded so naturally? Public trust also hangs in the balance. The monarchy's image has evolved significantly over the years, adapting to modern expectations while guarding ancient traditions. This moment introduces a new dimension: visible vulnerability. For some, it humanizes the institution, reminding the nation that behind titles are people who age, struggle, and change. For others, it raises doubts about resilience at the highest levels. The balance between empathy and concern is delicate, and the way the monarchy navigates it will shape perception for years to come. Symbolically, this is perhaps the most profound shift. Royal narratives have long centered on endurance, stoic figures weathering storms without visible cracks. Princess Anne's condition challenges that narrative. It forces the institution to acknowledge that strength does not mean invincibility, that discipline cannot outpace biology, that even the most steadfast figures are not immune to time. In that acknowledgement lies both risk and opportunity. Risk of appearing fragile, opportunity to appear human. Internally, restructuring is no longer hypothetical. Strategic conversations are underway about long-term adjustments, about sustainable roles, about protecting dignity while ensuring continuity. The monarchy is recalibrating quietly, preparing not only for her reduced involvement, but for a broader era of transition. Change rarely announces itself gently, and yet here it is arriving not through scandal or upheaval, but through something far more intimate. The broader implications ripple outward. If one of the institution's strongest pillars can shift, what else might evolve? The monarchy stands at a crossroads between tradition and transformation, between guarding legacy and redefining it. This chapter may be remembered not only for its sorrow, but for the way it reshaped expectations of royal strength. And as strategies are drafted and duties reassigned, a deeper realization settles in. Because beyond titles, beyond public trust, beyond institutional survival, something more fundamental remains at stake. But beyond duty, titles, and tradition, there is one final truth that cannot be ignored. In the end, this story isn't just about royalty, it's about memory, identity, and what it means to slowly lose both. Princess Anne, a man defined by strength and duty, now faces a journey that no title can shield her from. And as the world watches, one question lingers: when memories fade, what remains of the legacy we leave behind? For decades, her life has been measured in engagements attended, hands shaken, causes championed. But beneath the formal record lies something far more delicate: the quiet architecture of memory that holds a life together. Memory is more than recollection. It is the thread that binds yesterday to today. It is the invisible ledger of experience, the inner archive of laughter, disappointment, triumph, and sacrifice. For someone whose public identity was built on precision and recall, the fragility of that thread feels almost cruel. The monarchy may preserve history in stone and ceremony, but personal memory lives in something far less permanent. And when that begins to shift, the ground beneath identity shifts with it. There is a striking contrast between public legacy and private reality. On paper, Princess Anne's life is monumental decades of service, unwavering loyalty, a relentless commitment to duty. Her achievements are documented, cataloged, celebrated. Yet in private spaces, away from applause and tradition, the experience is far more intimate. There are moments of clarity that shine brightly, and moments where clarity dims. The world sees the legacy. The family sees the daily effort. Both are true. Both exist at the same time. What makes this story resonate so deeply is its universality. Strip away the crown, the titles, the grandeur, and what remains is a human being confronting something millions quietly endure. Memory loss does not discriminate between palace and ordinary home. It does not negotiate with status. It touches families across every background, every culture, every generation. In that shared vulnerability, the distance between royalty and public narrows. The woman once viewed as untouchable becomes profoundly relatable, and yet her impact endures. Service does not vanish because recall falters. Dedication does not dissolve because details blur. The causes she championed, the institutions she strengthened, the people she supported, they remain. Legacy, in its truest form, is not confined to what one person can remember. It lives in the lives changed, in the stability provided, in the examples set over a lifetime. That is something no diagnosis can erase. There is something bittersweet about remembrance. We honor the past even as we accept that parts of it may slip beyond reach. We hold on to stories, repeat them, safeguard them, because we understand how precious they are. For Princess Anne, the nation now becomes a keeper of memory in its own way, recalling the steadfast presence that shaped decades of royal life. In remembering her strength, the public participates in preserving it. The emotional weight of this chapter lingers because it forces a quiet reflection on our own lives. What defines us when the details blur? What remains when certainty fades? Perhaps it is not the precision of memory, but the imprint we leave behind, the consistency of character, the devotion shown when no one was watching. Those are the elements that outlast even the sharpest recall. As this journey unfolds, the story evolves from one of shock to one of reflection, from fear to understanding, from loss to legacy. And in that evolution, there is a gentle but powerful realization. A life lived with integrity casts a shadow far longer than memory alone can hold. And perhaps, in that quiet space between memory and legacy, we begin to understand the true cost of a life lived in the spotlight. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.